So some sideboard cards have the potential to be really, really good if you cast them in the right situation and in the right matchup. But then they also have their times when they don't do very much at all. So those are these high variance effects. So like one example, for instance, in Golgari out of the sideboard is Golden Demise, 3 mana kind of infest type effect where if you get to turn 3 and your opponent has played a bunch of small creatures and you're able to cast it, it's going to be very good. But there's going to be times when maybe I don't have double black since it's a double black sorcery. Or maybe I had to play a Llanowar Elves and a Merfolk Branchwalker, and so now on my turn 3, do I want to be sweeping away my own creatures with it? So you'll get into these situations where it's actually quite bad. And then there's going to be maybe other matchups. There's going to be matchups where, yeah, it's good against White Weenie, but do I want to be boarding in against Celestia where maybe they have Thorn Lieutenants in their deck where there's these 3 toughness creatures. So you'll kind of get into these situations where it's an example of a card that maybe I want to draw 1 copy of it in specific matchups, but do I want to have 4 Golden Demise in my deck? Pretty unlikely that you're going to want to do that. So it's kind of like, all right, I'm going to play these types of effects. Normally I'm going to only want 1 or 2 of them, and specifically cards that you do not want to draw 2 copies of, it's a good idea to kind of trim on those types of high variance effects. So at the last Pro Tour, a lot of players on our team were playing Golgari as our standard deck of choice, and I saw a list that Brad Nelson, a good friend of mine, posted the sideboard, and this was like the day before the tournament started, and a lot of times you'll have these situations where it's a few hours before submitting your deck, and then all of a sudden there's like a new sideboard card that you didn't think of before, and you're like, oh my gosh, is this really good? And it turns out that the card was actually Golgari Raiders, so you may not know what it does because, well, it's not that great, but anyways, it's a card that we thought we might put in our sideboard of our Golgari deck, and initially I was wondering, well, why would we want to put Golgari Raiders in the sideboard? It's just like a 4-mana haste guy that is like going to be a 1/1 or a 2/2. It looks pretty bad. And then my teammates were like, well, no, if you have Doom Whisperer and play one of the Haymaker cards out of the sideboard against control where you want to get the 6/6 on the battlefield, get a bunch of cards into your graveyard, and then maybe you find your Golgari Raiders for a huge swing and win the game. So it can be really good, right, when it's good. And they were, it's like, all right, maybe we want, how many Golgari Raiders do we want? Do we want 3? Do we want, how many? And it's like, well, it's only going to be good in a very narrow circumstance. So we kind of had this debate where some of us were just kind of like, no, like it's a card that is just like in my limited decks, I'm not playing Golgari Raiders. So it just didn't make sense. And I was kind of one of those players where trying to be realistic about it, even though it was kind of an outside perspective since I ended up playing a little bit of a different deck, but I just kind of said, all right, I don't think Golgari Raiders is where you want to be. I understand your opponent can cast a Star of Extinction, which is this is the whole idea behind the card, because Star of Extinction is the card that the control decks and standard rely on to beat Golgari. So they cast Star of Extinction, you have a Doom Whisperer in play, you put a bunch of cards in your graveyard, and then you eventually find the Golgari Raiders, and then you're able to cast it, and it's huge because you put a bunch of creatures in your graveyard. So I understand the concept, but in practice, it's just too... you're too likely to draw it. Maybe you don't have the Doom Whisperer in play, and for it to just be very bad. So that was kind of our debate. I was on the side of do not play the Golgari Raiders. My teammates did not listen to me, though.